All right, just a few tips I would like to share with whoever it might help, because it definitely helped me, and I had to spend quite a bit of time to discover these things. Now, obviously, what I'm going to say here and explain here maybe it doesn't apply to everybody, because every gamer has different priorities when it comes to optimization. But I considered I've got quite a bit of experience. I remember when I built my first gaming computer back when I was only, I think, 20 or 21. I did have a gaming computer before that, but it was pre-built. So the first one I made myself, I was about 20, 21 years old. Now I'm 39, almost 40. So yeah, I have quite a few years of experience with gaming, so I want to cover a few things that I find are important to know when you do PC gaming in particular. First of all, whenever you game on PC, it's always useful to have some sort of an overlay to show you key statistics, temperatures, your average FPS, frames per second, stuff like that. So that you can constantly know what is going on with your machine. Because when it comes to computers, it's not a closed environment like you get in a gaming console, where you do not have to worry about your components overheating as much or maybe having wrong settings. Every computer has a different set of components, and every gamer has a different set of priorities when it comes to computers. It's very, very different from consoles where everything is, the same in terms of configuration. Nowadays, you can customize things more when it comes to game consoles, but still, when it comes to PC, it's very important to know these things. So to cover the overlay here, there are many ways to do it, but I like to use MSI AB, otherwise known as MSI Afterburner. It's a free software you can download onto your computer. Generally, when you install it, it'll offer you to also install the RiverTuner statistics server, also known as RTSS, which is a component that will give you this overlay here. So I'm just going to show you guys real quick my setup here for MSI AB. I'm just going to bring my window for OBS here so that I can show you this real quick. So I'm going to have this show up right there. I'm going to close that. It's just going to take me a second here. All right. Let's pop this window open for you guys. So I'm going to resize this window here so you guys can see what I'm talking about. Just a moment. I'm going to bring that to the top. Order, move to top. Okay. So right now you should be able to see this black window, which I'm currently resizing. At least I hope so. I will check the live stream just to make sure that it is indeed showing. Just a second, bear with me 20 more seconds. I will make sure that this is actually working, otherwise this would be pointless. Live video, let's see. Now you should be able to, yeah, okay, it works, good. Okay, so here I'm going to drag over the MSI AB window, which you should be able to see right now, to show you what you need to do to be able to use this overlay here right now. So you just install the MSI Afterburner software, quite simple. Once you got it installed, you go into your settings and you make sure you got some of those settings here, which you will need. So obviously I like to have it start with Windows, start minimize, so that doesn't open in the way, and then you can enable all of these settings that you see here. If you intend on overclock your GPU, you don't have to if you don't overclock your graphics card. And then when it comes to monitoring, this is where you want to tick some settings so that you can see those statistics in your overlay. Now, obviously, you might want to monitor different things than I'm monitoring here, but I'm still going to show you what I have. So I've got CPU temperature as my first one, very important. Notice how it's ticked here on the show in on-screen display section here. I've got it both on monitoring and OSD. So it's very important to take the thing that will say show in the on-screen display. The on-screen display is your overlay here in game. So you want that to be enabled. You can customize the fonts and the size of your, your things there and the color of the fonts on the overlay if you want. You can also rename the graph name. That's also kind of important. So I've got the override group name here and override graph name here, to make sure that everything related to the CPU will end up on that first line here. Otherwise, if you let MSI AB do its thing by itself, it might have CPU temperature on a different line than, say, your CPU voltage usage, right, or CPU percentage use. So I like to rename the group to the same, if you want all your CPU related stats to be on the same line as, together, you want the group name to be the same for all three, right? So in my case, it's CPU. The graph name can be different. The graph name is what you get in here on the, monitoring tab here that you can double click with your left click mouse to open it up and see all of the things you're monitoring. So very important to do this. So I've got this done for the CPU. I'm just going to go back here and show you the rest. So CPU usage, same story. Enable it in the on-screen display. Customize it if you like. RAM usage, this will show you how much RAM you're currently using for your whole system. Not your GPU VRAM, so not the RAM from your graphics card, but the RAM from your your DDR5 or DDR4 memory in your system. Then the frame rate, frame time. The frame rate is your average FPS, the number of image per second that you're getting on screen when you're playing. Right now you're seeing 30 FPS because I'm out of the game window right now. If I left click into it again, the FPS will go up. This is because of the settings I've got for Arc Raiders right now. But going back to this window here, I've got the frame rate shown. So where it says FPS here, this is a current FPS I'm currently displaying in the game, and the number next to that is a frame time. That gives you an idea of the latency that you're currently having. It's not complete information. If you really want the true latency, you'd need to use something like FrameView. Sometimes games even have their own benchmarking tool, which Arc Raiders luckily has. So if you go into your settings in Arc Raiders, I'm not going to spend too much time on Arc Raiders here, but I'm just going to show you where to find it. In-game performance overlay, if you turn that on, detailed, you will eventually get some details about your stats, including latency. So going to the next setting here, at the bottom here, I've got a few more settings. So I've got the frame time 1% lows, frame time 0.1% lows. This currently is not working for me. It used to work a few days ago. I did something that messed it up, but it's not too important, so I'm going to skip over that. GPU temperature is super important. The CPU temp and the GPU temp is the two that you should at least have at all times on your overlay. If you don't want to have a chunky overlay like mine or something that takes too many lines or a big part of your screen, you can minimize the amount of stuff you're monitoring. You should at least always monitor the temperature of your CPU and GPU, because it often happens on PC that maybe you did something stupid. Some settings tend to reset when you reboot your computer, and you end up having the wrong MSI AB overclock profile on your graphics card, and all of a sudden your card's overheating and you haven't even realized it. Now obviously most graphics cards by default will increase the fan speed when that happens, but they have a curve that is built around specific settings, and if your graphics card has quite a few years of usage, sometimes that is not enough. Sometimes you need to crank the cooling a bit higher to compensate, or if you're overclocking, you might need something different than the default settings, which is why monitoring temperatures is super important, because for the longevity of your components, you do not want your CPU or GPU to hit, too high temperatures. You want to maintain them at a cool temperature or something reasonable so you can keep the gear you paid for a long time. So GPU temperature, GPU usage is also very useful to have. Notice how GPU usage is not shown on my overlay here. I don't mind not having it there. I can always look at the monitoring tab or benchmark logs afterwards if I need it. But a lot of people do like to have that on their overlay there. Then I've got the memory usage. I like to have that at all times. I always see how much VRAM is being used. Obviously, it's not showing everything about VRAM, but it's some of the important numbers I want. Core clock is the clock speed of my GPU, and then I've got the voltage of my GPU next to that. So memory clock, power as well. I like to have the wattage shown both for my CPU and GPU. This is more useful when you do overclocking, less so if you're just gaming, I guess. GPU usage, memory usage, I love to have that as well. This shows me how much memory I'm using. That's the RAM thing you're seeing here on my monitor. Well, not right now because I moved this window here. I'm just going to slide this guy here so you can see that. Okay. Core clock, memory clock, power, fan speed. I like to have that in the monitoring tab, but not on the overlay. That's to make sure that my settings are currently applying the way I want them to. And then CPU power is also the wattage you see here. So pretty much all these things are ticked out, and there you go. The on-screen display settings here, you can have a hotkey to toggle whether the on-screen display will show or not. So right now I'm going to press that key, and it should make the overlay disappear. Right now it's not doing it, probably because I'm focusing on the other window here. I'm just going to toggle out of that. Yeah, for some reason it's not working, but usually it works flawlessly. It's probably just because I'm streaming or focusing on the other window here. So yeah, this is one thing you can use. You can also have other hotkeys, configured for if you have a frame rate limiter. If you want to cap your FPS, you can set a hotkey for that as well. So this is for the MSI AB part. Just wanted to show you that. And then for the RTSS section, I'm going to show you that as well. I'm just going to move this one over here. So the RTSS settings window, this is where you configure specifically the things related to your overlay. This is where you'll often need to add the shortcut or the exe file for your game so that you can tweak the settings specifically for that game. So for instance, some games have a mini-map where, right in the top right corner here, that you might not want your overlay to be sitting on top of, or maybe the layout is different for the HUD and you need the overlay to be slightly to the bottom here or to the left or whatever. So this is where you can customize everything in here. Obviously for most games you can have what they call a global setting profile. So this is what happens for most new exe files, is the global setting, but you can add a specific game and then tweak it. So for instance, for Arc Raiders, it's pioneergame.exe. You can go in there and tweak those settings here so that you get what you want. So in most cases you want everything to be like this, where the on-screen display shadow is on if you want your FPS to be clearer. You can use the show own statistics or not. That's not as relevant, but this here is important. On-screen display support. If this is not on, you will not see your overlay over the game. So this needs to be on. The application detection level, you almost never need to play with that. Usually I keep it on low. This is how much the RTSS will detect and use the input to inject the overlay into the game. Some games have very strong anti-cheat software that sometimes will conflict with RTSS, but it's very rare. But if it does happen, you can increase that or lower it depending if you're having problems with the anti-cheat software. But it almost never happens in my case, pretty much. So yeah, this is the RTSS and an MSI AB thing that I wanted to show. Then another thing that's very important to know is when it comes to graphics card and the way that you play in a video game, basically the equation you're looking for is you're trying to get as many FPS as you can whilst respecting your, I'm trying to close this one up for a second, just a moment, your refresh rate for your monitor. So if your monitor is, let's say, a 100 Hertz refresh rate monitor like mine is right here. Mine is overclocked, but let's just imagine it's 100 Hertz, right? Usually you'd like to have at least 100 FPS at all times. Ideal scenario, obviously some games are more demanding and you might get lower FPS, but you're trying to get that. The other thing is, if you like smoothness, no screen tearing, and weird artifacts, usually you don't want your FPS to go above your refresh rate. If you're playing super competitive FPS shooters like CSGO, whatever, sometimes you'll forego the tearing and everything, and you'll allow the FPS to go way above your refresh rate so that you get the least amount of input lag. That's the delay between the moment where you move your mouse or press a button somewhere and the moment it registers on your monitor and happens in front of your eyes, which gives you a competitive advantage. So in those very competitive games, you might want to have your FPS go over your refresh rate limit despite the screen tearing that it might produce. There are things that can help with that, but still it's going to happen if you do that. I like to never have that. I like playing competitive as well sometimes, but I've got an ultra-wide monitor. I'm more of a admire the scenery guy than absolute sheer competitiveness out of my setup. So that's why I like to have the smoothness, and this is where it's key. A lot of people don't know this, but what you want to do is, for your monitor, you always want VSYNC to be activated, and ideally you want a monitor that has VSYNC and G-Sync, or VSYNC and FreeSync. Nowadays, most monitors support at least FreeSync, sometimes adaptive adaptive sync if it's older, but most monitors support FreeSync or G-Sync. FreeSync is AMD's side of the approach, and then G-Sync is NVIDIA's approach. They're quite similar in fashion. They can both achieve a similar result. NVIDIA have their own, G-Sync thing where the module is present in the monitor and syncs every frame with whatever your graphics card is outputting, which prevents the VSync from cutting in half your FPS. In the old days, it used to be that if you had an FPS drop, right, in a very demanding game, say you were at 75, 90 FPS, and all of a sudden you enter a intense area of the game, drops to like 60 FPS or something like that, instead of dropping to 60, 65, you'd be dropping you know, healthy refresh rate, so from 100 to 50 FPS, something like that, creating very laggy, chunky, and clunky feeling when you play, very unpleasant. So G-Sync eliminates that, FreeSync as well. So make sure that if you do have FreeSync or G-Sync enabled or supported by your monitor, that you enable it in the settings in your control panel, so in NVIDIA control panel or the AMD side of things. Make sure it's enabled, and most of the time by default it will be enabled only if your game is running full screen. But nowadays, because of the use of overlays, Overwolf, and useful, you know, overlays like the RTSS thing or others, we tend to run games in borderless full screen most of the time. So because of that, you want to have, you know, FreeSync and G-Sync enabled for both windowed and full screen mode. That way, whether your game is running full screen or borderless, you know, full screen or windowed mode, G-Sync and FreeSync will continue to run, which will give you a great amount of smoothness, and it's really just great because it allows you to push for the maximum amount of graphical fidelity in your games, you know, tweak the settings to a higher level, especially if you've got a graphics card that can do it, without having to deal with the weird behavior, input lag and drops and clunkiness of the FPS moving all over the place. So it allows you to play a game, push it to the max. If you have a 100 Hz refresh rate monitor like mine, and let's say your FPS is averaging between, say, 60 to 90 FPS, right? That's kind of a wide range, but with G-Sync or FreeSync, you won't get a lot of the, you know, weird behavior that you would get if that was not enabled or functioning properly. Then there's another thing. So I mentioned two things up to now. I said you want to have V-Sync enabled, and you want to have G-Sync or FreeSync enabled as well and properly configured. You'll often hear people say, oh, turn off VSync and or manually cap your FPS. In my experience, the whole talk about capping your FPS, the reason for doing this is to eliminate even more input lag, because whenever you have VSync enabled or any game that you're playing, you'll notice that there's sometimes a little bit of input lag that happens to your game when you're not using NVIDIA Reflex or some way of capping your FPS. Oftentimes you'll notice that if you use NVIDIA Reflex, the Boost Plus Ultra version of the technology, it will subtract approximately 3 FPS out of your maximum. So let's say my monitor max refresh rate is 100 Hz. Well, I'm going to be running at 97 FPS instead of 100, which will remove a lot of input lag. Again, that's very, very important. This I discovered over the years, removes completely all those stutters and micro stutters that you often find in game. You can measure how much or how bad the stuttering situation is in your game by moving your mouse one way. So let's say you take your mouse and you scroll to the left, right? And in the meantime, you use your, WASD on your keyboard to move your character the opposite way or to rotate. So basically what you're doing is you're using your mouse to rotate, and then with your keyboard you're making a character also move. So it's a combination of moving and camera movement. Kind of like, imagine having in your hands a PS5 controller or Xbox controller, and with the one joystick you're moving your camera, and with the other you're moving your character. And the combination of the two, you can see the stutter, the shaking of the image, the micro stutters, very annoying, very distracting, and it kills the immersion. And the way to remove that completely is to have both VSync enabled, FreeSync or G-Sync depending on your monitor's technology and your graphics card, and then also have some way of capping your maximum FPS, which you can do manually using something like the RTSS overlay to force a maximum amount of FPS. So you could say, cap the FPS of my game at 97 FPS instead of hitting my max refresh rate of 100 using RTSS. You can do that, or better yet, you can do it using the NVIDIA Reflex technology. And now I don't know exactly, because I'm not familiar with all of AMD's side of things, because I'm mostly using NVIDIA graphics cards for the past 15 years, maybe more. So I imagine that on AMD's side there maybe is a similar tech, right, to eliminate input lag. I'd have to look it up. But yeah, for NVIDIA it's called NVIDIA Reflex. So you can either do it manually, like I said, cap it, or enable NVIDIA Reflex. And then you'll notice that sometimes if you open a game and you have all these things configured properly, right, VSync enabled, G-Sync and FreeSync properly configured and enabled, and then NVIDIA Reflex Ultra plus Boost, so the maximum level for that thing, you'll notice that your FPS is not being capped at the 3 FPS below the max refresh rate like it should. Sometimes when that happens, it's a conflict with some of your overlays, especially when you're running multiple overlays. Sometimes you might want to disable one at a time to find out which one is causing a conflict. It doesn't happen all the time, honestly, it's very rare. But let's say you're using the Steam overlay, plus the NVIDIA app overlay, plus the RTSS overlay, plus Overwolf overlays. Sometimes you might get one of them that interferes with your NVIDIA Reflex. I recently discovered for myself, that's the reason why I decided to make this video, because I found out that something I was trying to use for streaming, it's called the Transparent Twitch Chat app or something like that. It allows you to have your live YouTube chat displayed as an overlay, which is very useful. You can put it on top of your game, same as the RTSS overlay here. And I wanted to have that because I wanted to be able to see the comments and the reactions from people during the live stream instantly, and I wanted to be notified with the sound as well. And I didn't want it to be on my second monitor because I often, when I game, obviously I'm focused on the game, I might not notice what's going on the second monitor unless I pause to actively look at what's going on there. But I discovered that for some reason the Transparent Twitch overlay app interferes with NVIDIA Reflex for some reason. I haven't found a fix yet. I'm trying to find it. As all things with technology and troubleshooting, it takes a long time. Sometimes you have to do, a lot of questing, if I could say, or looking and searching to find what's the reason for the problem, and it takes a while sometimes before you find a solution. So the Twitch overlay interfered with the NVIDIA Reflex, and the reason I noticed, because I instantly notice it whenever I'm in a game and I don't have the holy trifecta of VSYNC, G-Sync, and NVIDIA Reflex. I instantly notice the input lag, the clogginess, just the weird behavior of the game. Whereas when I have that, all these three things, it's amazing, completely smooth, no problems, no issues in the experience. I'm going to show you what I mean here. I'm going to practice range just to show you what I mean by this. I'm intentionally going to open the Transparent Twitch overlay thing just so you can see what's going on. Okay. Alright, so I'm in the game now. My monitor is currently overclocked to a refresh rate of 110 Hz, which means it can output a maximum of 110 FPS before being over the limit, which could cause screen tearing. Notice how my FPS is currently being capped at 107 FPS, right? So perfectly fluid, absolutely no stuttering of any kind, zero. So the way I know this is I can look at the target here, I can rotate my character or move it, and then rotate the camera at the same time, opposite directions, and no stuttering whatsoever, no shaking, nothing, perfect, smooth, buttery motion, just like I like it, right? The way I like it. Now I'm going to open the Twitch overlay thingy, just to show you what I mean. It's currently on my second monitor. I'm going to slide it over to my game window, okay? The second I do this, look at my FPS. You don't see by the way, you guys are not seeing the Twitch overlay because it's hidden. It's only me that can see it right now. But I have, I slide it to the game window, and notice how my FPS is now 110. NVIDIA Reflex is not doing its job anymore just because that overlay is currently sitting on top of my game. I'm going to slide it back to my second monitor again, and boom, NVIDIA Reflex takes control of the pipeline once more. So this is very, very important because not a lot of people know this. A lot of people, don't know how to achieve perfect smoothness like this in a game, and it's so much better in every single game. Single player games, competitive games, whatever. Obviously, if you intend on having the least amount of input lag, yes, you go way above your refresh rate like we discussed before, but this is such a combination. A lot of people don't know about that, the fact that these things work together to achieve this particular result, and it's very, very, very smooth. I like it. It's very fun to use. And then when it comes to the NVIDIA control panel, again, I'm going to use this here to increase the size of the previous window so you can see what I'm talking about. Just a moment. There it is. I'm going to increase its size. You'll be able to see it in a moment. There we go. And I'm going to open the NVIDIA control panel to show you a few more things in there as well. So there we go. I'm going to slide it over to this screen so you can see it. I'm going to close the RTSS tuner thing. So this is the overlay for the Twitch transparent thing that I was talking about. Right now where it is on the second monitor, it's not interfering with the game. This is the NVIDIA control panel. It's possible that the fonts here are not super big in terms of size because this is a 4K monitor, but I'm still going to run you through what I got here. So in the NVIDIA control panel, very important if you've got an NVIDIA graphics card, you go to your VSYNC here. If it were an AMD card, you'd go to your FreeSync section. Notice how I've got it enabled, both for windowed and full screen mode, like I mentioned before. Very important right here in the setup VSYNC section of the display settings in the NVIDIA control panel. And then other than that, you also want to go into Manage 3D Settings. You can create a profile just like RTSS that is going to be global. So by default, this is the one that's going to apply to most of your video games. I advise not tweaking that too much unless you know what you're doing. But you can go in Program Settings and tweak and customize the settings for each of your games that you play. So for instance, in the case of Arc Raiders, I noticed that if I want to maintain VSync whilst also using FrameGen, this is another thing that you might have heard about FrameGen. Nowadays, the newer graphics cards, the series 4000 and 5000 when it comes to NVIDIA and onward, and the AMD graphics cards, some of them also have that or are about to have more and more of that. The FrameGen is very useful. It introduces some input lag, but usually it's acceptable, especially with NVIDIA Reflex. But usually enabling FrameGen for some reason automatically disables VSync, right? It makes sense somewhat, but in my case, I never want to have my FPS go above my refresh rate, ever, even with FrameGen, because I absolutely want to have that smooth butter motion. So what I do in Arc Raiders, I use FrameGen. I don't use FrameGen in all the games. Some games are less demanding and don't require FrameGen to be activated. But in the case of Arc Raiders, I like to max the graphic settings, as much as I can to get really nice fidelity. And because of that, I need to run FrameGen. But I want to keep VSync so that I can have the smooth motion. So what you do in here, you go to the Arc Raiders. Well, you just click Add. You find your Arc Raiders exe file, usually located in the Steam Apps section. So that usually would be, programs x86, Steam Apps, Common, and then you'll find it here somewhere. In my case, it's well, it's not in this folder, but it's called pioneer.exe. So once you have it, you go down and you find VSync and you force it on. That way, even when you apply FrameGen, you can still have VSync. And at the top here, you'll notice I have low latency mode on off, which is kind of weird because I spent all this time talking about NVIDIA Reflex. And the reason being that whenever you're in Arc Raiders, and this is different for every single game, but it's important to know that. I'm just going to go back to the game for a second, just a moment. Okay, so I'm going to close this black window here again so that you can see the game. Okay. So when you're in Arc Raiders or other games, usually enabling FrameGen disables VSync, which is why you want to force it on through the NVIDIA control panel if you want the same type of holy trifecta I've been talking about. And when it comes to NVIDIA Reflex, you don't need to worry about that because enabling FrameGen automatically turns on NVIDIA Reflex despite the setting being grayed out right now in the game. So notice how VSync is grayed out and NVIDIA Reflex is grayed out. That's because FrameGen is currently enabled in my game. And despite that being the fact, NVIDIA Reflex is on by default when you use FrameGen, because since FrameGen introduces quite a bit of input lag, by default NVIDIA absolutely want NVIDIA Reflex to be running to compensate for that. But VSync is disabled when you enable FrameGen. So that's why in my control panel, in NVIDIA, I've got VSync forced on to compensate the behavior here, and I've got NVIDIA Reflex set to off because I want to make sure that the game is allowed to inject the NVIDIA Reflex, because I found out and noticed that whenever I had NVIDIA Reflex set to on in my NVIDIA control panel, it kind of interfered with this game that's a weird behavior because normally that does not happen with other game titles I've been playing. If I set the NVIDIA Reflex to on in the NVIDIA control panel or in game, it does not conflict. There's no problem. It's just in this specific game I noticed that it wasn't working. So this is why it's really useful to have custom-made profile for, you know, separate games. That way, if you notice a weird behavior in one game, you can quickly go and force what you need in the NVIDIA control panel, achieving the ultimate result of, you know, having smooth button motion, a little bit of FPS cap below your refresh rate, VSYNC on and G-Sync on, and those three things combined is just amazing when you game and stuff like that. So this is for ARC Raiders, but it's quite useful to know. So I thought I'd cover some of those topics real quick because over the years I've learned to, you know, master them and tweak around them, and it's been really good for me. The last thing I want to cover real quick by showing this window here again is about temperatures. So when it comes to your temperatures for your GPU and CPU, obviously there's a wide variety of philosophies on how to approach that, but I just want to cover quickly what I think about that and my experience over the years. Now obviously every graphics card and CPU or processor have different temperatures that are safe, you know, max temperatures that are safe. It's different from an older graphics card to a more recent one. Some graphics card can easily go up to like 80 or even 85 degrees Celsius or even 95 without actually damaging the GPU. You might get performance throttling, but you won't be damaging your chip even if you're going that high. So knowing that, every person approaches it differently. But in my case, what I like to do is basically keep my components at a temperature that I find comfortable for longevity, to where I know that there won't be damage, there won't be too much performance throttling, and I won't need to crank my fans like crazy, and I won't have to have huge amounts of noise when I play. So again, another holy trifecta, you know, nice temperatures, nice performance, not too much noise, and yeah, and a fan curve that goes along with that. But just before I go and cover that, I just want to look here in game. You do see the overlay here at the top right of my screen. I'm just going to cover that real quick. So currently you notice that my CPU is running between like 58 to 60 degrees Celsius all the way to 70, which for my chip is perfectly safe. Some people like to have it a bit cooler than that, or some are comfortable with that going all the way up to 75, 80. My chip is able to handle like temperatures easily up to 80 degrees Celsius and upwards even without too much problem. I'm running my chip quite overclocked, so obviously it's going to be a bit hotter. I closed the door here of my basement, of my room here, so the heat is not moving out of the room that it usually does. I did that so that the kids don't make too much noise to interfere with the stream right now. So usually my temperature is lower than that. But okay, so for the CPU, basically what you want to have is, again, it depends on the specific CPU, but in my case it's a Core Ultra 7 265K processor, and it used to be that I would like to always aim for like 50 to 60 degrees Celsius max load temperature when I was gaming for those older CPUs that could not handle you know, temperatures higher than 80 degrees Celsius. Back in the day, it was like 95, 100 degrees Celsius is where you'd start damaging your chip. Nowadays, you have some chips that won't really be damaged unless you go above 105, 110, 115, depending on the CPU that you have. So in my case, I've got the settings configured to make sure that my CPU never goes above 80, right? The fan profiles are going to kick in more aggressively if the temperatures were to reach that high, but I can always see it. So if something is wrong, right, I will see it instantly. So for instance, let's say your thermal paste on your CPU that sits between your CPU and your cooler is due for replacing, or if for some reason your CPU fan has stopped working, well, the overlay here is going to allow you to see, whoa, wait a second, my temperatures are shooting up to 95 Celsius while I'm gaming. That's completely abnormal. So it allows you to spot that something is abnormal, and then you can start troubleshooting, looking for what's the reason why the temperature is so high. And you might know, you might notice, oh, my fan has stopped working, or maybe my thermal paste needs replacing, or something's wrong, right? Maybe the overclock, for some reason you hit a wrong button and all of a sudden you have injected way more voltage than you should for your CPU. Again, this will allow you to see it. And for the CPU, for the GPU, it's a bit different. For graphics cards, most modern graphics cards, you can have them run like 60, 70, or even 80 degrees Celsius and not be worried. Some might even go to 85 briefly, you know, in some peaks during gaming, maybe even 90, and it's still somewhat safe. It's not ideal, but it's safe. So again, I've got my things set up to make sure that my GPU never goes above, I think it's like ADC. I know that it can go above that safely, but I've got my fan profiles set up in a more aggressive fashion so that if my temperatures do go above 70 or above 80, they behave in a certain way to make sure that my GPU never goes there. So basically, the way that I'm set up, I have been able to identify, okay, my CPU tends to run like 55 to like 70 degrees Celsius, which is just fine. It's perfect for me. And then the GPU tends to run, well, I got a really good graphics card right now, and it's brand new as well, which usually runs between like 48, 50 degrees Celsius all the way to like 63, 65, sometimes 67 in that area, but never goes beyond that. So I don't really hit any thermal throttling because of that. So yeah, so those are the temperatures you want to monitor and make sure they do not exceed a certain number. So I'd say if you have a modern CPU like Core Ultra 7 265K, or maybe a Gen 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 Intel CPU, you want to make sure ideally that your CPU is never hitting above 80. If you see something like 85, 83, 86 briefly, that's fine. But if you see that you're permanently at all times running at 85C or even 90 during gaming, you've probably got a cooling problem. Maybe you need to do something about it. When it comes to the GPU, it's somewhat similar, but a bit more forgiving. So for the GPU, let's say you're hovering between 50 to like 80C during gaming loads at all times. Well, that's fine. You know, it's not great to always be at 80C or 80 degrees Celsius on your GPU, but it's fine for modern models. It's okay. It's not going to necessarily damage your graphics card. You're going to hit, you know, thermal throttling at that point if you hit ADC, obviously, in some cases, depending on the age of your graphics card. But it's still somewhat safe, right? If you start seeing, oh, you're always at 85, 84 during gaming, that's also safe for a GPU. It's a bit more forgiving than the CPU. But if you see something like 90, 95 at all times during gaming on a graphics card, that's not normal. It's not ideal. It's not sustainable long term. So those are temperatures to look for. So I'd say, generally speaking, for me, I'm okay with the GPU being like 5 to 10 degrees hotter than my CPU. So the same limits I mentioned for the CPU, I generally look for something 5 to 10 degrees Celsius higher than that on the GPU side to consider it safe. So if I don't want to see anything higher than 80 on my CPU, 75, 80, usually I don't want to see anything higher than 85, you know, 90 on the CPU, on the GPU side of things. So again, it's like those are limits. They're not numbers that I want to be sitting at, but they're numbers that I'm targeting as, you know, no-go zones. I don't want to go there at all. So yeah, if you do that, usually you'll turn out fine. Another little piece of information you might find useful when you upgrade a computer or you buy a new computer for yourself for gaming and stuff like that. Obviously, there are different components you're going to be shopping for. It's a good idea, generally speaking, to, you know, spend a little bit of extra money on the graphics card to make sure you've got a good cooling solution, either a third-party cooling solution you'll install yourself, or a graphics card that already has good solutions. And sometimes an easy, cheap way to get more longevity out of your graphics cards and less hassle and better temperatures is to look for a graphics card that has PTM pre-installed. So PTM stands for phase change thermal material, I think it is. It's you know, oftentimes there are companies that make a lot of those for big industries, corporations, servers, server racks and stuff like that, and it's meant for long-term usage. Whereas thermal compound is just fine too. It's just that it tends to, you know, need replacing much faster. So if you can get a graphics card where the manufacturer or the third party has pre-installed PTM on the GPU die, that's kind of nice. It adds to the longevity. Obviously, if you run your graphics card really hot and you overclock your VRAM like a madman, your thermal pads on the VRAM might need replacing faster than the PTM on the die. But assuming you are setting your things correctly, shooting for you know, reasonable temperatures and making sure that your GPU and CPU are not overheating all the time, Well, if you bought yourself a graphics card that has PTM on the GPU die, that will save you some trouble as well, probably. It's quality of life. It's not a game changer, absolutely, like not something that you have to have in every graphics card that you buy. It's completely fine to reapply thermal paste, but I do like the idea of PTM for the longevity side of things, which means that if for some reason you're going to be running the same graphics card or the same CPU for, say, 5 to 8 years, maybe more, well, there's a good chance that you won't ever need to change the PTM during that period of time, because it's meant for longer usage. It's got a really good contact with the die is trying to transfer the heat from. So yeah, those are just a few tech tips and advice I wanted to share with you guys, given how many years I've tweaked the video games and settings to ensure that I had the experience that I wanted. I remember the days where you could still do, you know, SLI and Crossfire, where you could pair multiple graphics cards together, which in turn had even more input lag. So back in those days, the capping your FPS below your max refresh rate was so important to ensure smooth motion and stuff like that. So nowadays it's less of an issue, given that we don't do as much SLI and stuff like that. But still, in a lot of video games, you will notice a difference instantly. Like I haven't shown you guys this, but I will end with this here. I will slide over the Twitch app overlay thing again over my game, instantly ruining the NVIDIA Reflex thing, and I'm going to try at this high FPS that I've got here. You might not notice it as well, but I'm going to try and show you the micro stutter if I can. Yeah, it's barely noticeable. I can notice it, I can feel it when I move around, but at this particular FPS, since it's so high, it's not as noticeable. But if I were in a very intense section of the game, actually, let's try this, because I really want you guys to see what I'm talking about. Overall quality, let's turn this all the way up to like cinematic, just to force. I usually run everything cinematic anyways, but I'm just going to crank it up here. My graphics card is eating this game for breakfast. Even at cinematic, I was hoping for more of an FPS drop. Okay, yeah, I got frame gen. I'm going to turn off frame gen as well. Just okay, yeah, there we go. Okay, so now at this FPS, like around 70-ish, we should be able to see the stutter way more. Okay, yeah, I can see it now. You guys can probably see it as well. I'm just gonna do this real quick. So yeah, it stutters a bit, it's shaky a bit, especially when you combine camera movement with character movement. It's not the worst, I've seen worse, but yeah. So now I toss this overlay up to the second monitor, enabling refresh again. Now obviously I'm not hitting the max refresh rate, so you're not going to see the FPS cut off, but you'll notice that there's way less input lag, like zero stuttering anymore, simply because NVIDIA Reflex was allowed to kick back in because the overlay is not interfering. So it's just to express the fact that having all three, VSYNC, G-Sync, and the NVIDIA Reflex capping your FPS just gives you a very nice experience when gaming. So I hope that some of these tips have been useful for you. Feel free to ask any questions you might have in the comments if you have any. I hope that this helps you out and that you can enjoy this smooth motion in your games as well. So remember, G-Sync, VSync, and the FPS cap through the NVIDIA Reflex or some other AMD equivalent, if there is one, will give you a very, very nice experience when you game, especially if you're playing like RPGs, you know, games where you don't need the super crazy input lag reduction. If you're playing something super competitive like Battlefield 6, you know, CSGO, stuff like that, this might be less relevant in that type of philosophy, but otherwise it's very, very nice to have that kind of smoothness.